Little girl celebrates her birthday alone. Disguised millionaire sees and does something incredible. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type HOPE in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The morning light struggled through the thin curtains of the small apartment on Maple Street, casting long shadows across the modest living room where Sarah Martinez lay on a mattress placed directly on the floor. At 35, her once vibrant face showed the wear of years spent fighting both poverty and an illness that seemed to grow stronger each day. But today wasn't about her struggles. Today was about Grace. "Mama, is it really my birthday?" Grace asked, her 7-year-old voice filled with the kind of hope that only children possess. Her blonde hair, inherited from a father she'd never met, fell in gentle waves around her shoulders as she knelt beside her mother's makeshift bed. Sarah managed a weak smile, her hand reaching out to stroke her daughter's cheek. "Yes, sweetheart, it's November 15th, and you're officially 7 years old today." Her voice carried both joy and heartbreak. Joy for her beautiful daughter, heartbreak for the celebration she couldn't provide. Grace bounced slightly on her knees, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement despite their humble surroundings. The apartment was clean but sparse, with mismatched furniture that had seen better days and walls that desperately needed fresh paint. The kitchen consisted of a small refrigerator, a 2-burner stove, and cabinets that rarely held more than the essentials. "Will we have cake, Mama?" Grace asked, though she tried to hide the hope in her voice. She'd learned not to ask for too much, understanding somehow that her mother was doing everything she could with very little. Sarah's heart clenched. The $20 she'd saved for Grace's birthday cake had gone to her medication just 2 days ago when her condition had worsened. The choice between her daughter's happiness and her own health had been devastating, but she couldn't risk leaving Grace alone in this world. "I have something even more special," Sarah said, reaching under her pillow to pull out a single white birthday candle. "This is a magic candle, Grace. When you make a wish on it, something wonderful will happen." Grace's eyes widened with wonder. At 7, she still believed in magic, in fairy tales, and in the power of wishes. She carefully took the candle from her mother's trembling hands, holding it as if it were made of precious crystal. "But we need a cake for the candle, don't we?" Grace asked innocently. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hide. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the most powerful wishes are made without cake. They come straight from the heart." As Grace examined the candle, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the letter she'd mailed 3 days ago. A letter that had taken her weeks to write and rewrite. The letter addressed to Michael Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises, the man who had no idea he had a daughter. 7 years ago, Sarah had been a young graduate student working part-time at a coffee shop near the university. Michael had been there finishing his MBA, brilliant and ambitious, but also kind and funny. Their relationship had been brief but intense. 3 months that had changed Sarah's life forever. When she discovered she was pregnant, Sarah had been terrified, but also filled with a joy she'd never experienced. She'd planned to tell Michael, had rehearsed the words 100 times, but then Margaret Harrison, Michael's mother, had appeared at her apartment. Margaret Harrison was everything Sarah was not. Wealthy, powerful, and utterly convinced that Sarah was nothing more than a gold digger trying to trap her son. The threats had been subtle but effective. Margaret had made it clear that if Sarah ever contacted Michael about the pregnancy, she would use her considerable influence to destroy any chance Sarah had at completing her degree or finding decent employment. "Young women like you think you can trap successful men with convenient pregnancies," Margaret had said, her voice cold as winter. "My son has a bright future ahead of him, and I won't let some waitress ruin that with her schemes." Faced with the choice between her own future and what she believed was best for Michael, Sarah had made the hardest decision of her life. She'd moved across the state, had Grace alone, and had never contacted Michael. But as her illness progressed and her financial situation became desperate, she realized that Grace deserved to know her father, and perhaps Michael deserved to know about his daughter. The letter had been carefully crafted, written in a way that would intrigue rather than alarm. She'd mentioned that she had important information about a daughter he didn't know existed, provided her address, and explained that time was running short due to her health condition. She'd signed it simply, "Someone from your past who needs your help." "Mama, can we light the candle now?" Grace asked, interrupting Sarah's painful memories. "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah reached for the matches they kept for the occasional power outage. Her hands shook slightly as she lit the candle, and Grace gasped with delight as the small flame danced in the dim light of their apartment. "Make a wish, Grace. Make the biggest, most important wish of your life." Grace closed her eyes tightly, her small hands clasped together in front of the candle. Sarah watched her daughter's face, seeing such concentration and hope that it broke her heart all over again. "I wish," Grace whispered, then opened her eyes. "I can't tell you, Mama, or it won't come true." "That's right, sweetheart. The best wishes are secret wishes." But Sarah could guess what her daughter had wished for. Grace had asked about her father countless times over the years, and Sarah had always given vague answers about him being far away and unable to be with them right now. Grace was smart enough to understand that other children had fathers, and Sarah knew her daughter longed for that missing piece of her family. As they sat together watching the candle burn, Sarah prayed silently that her letter would reach Michael, that he would be curious enough to investigate, and that somehow this desperate gamble would give Grace the future she deserved. The candle burned lower, wax dripping onto the small saucer Sarah had placed beneath it. Grace watched with fascination, as if the flame held all the magic in the world, and perhaps Sarah thought it did. "Mama, do you think my wish will come true?" Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I think," she whispered, "that today is going to be a very special day indeed." Neither of them knew that across town, in a gleaming office building that reached toward the clouds, Michael Harrison was holding Sarah's letter in his hands, reading it for the third time, with a mixture of disbelief and growing curiosity. The magic, it seemed, was already beginning to work. 30 miles across the city, in the pristine executive suite of Harrison Enterprises, Michael Harrison stood before floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline. At 33, he had built his father's modest construction company into a multi-million-dollar empire, specializing in luxury real estate development. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, and his steel-gray eyes reflected the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the youngest CEOs in the industry. But this morning, Michael's attention wasn't focused on the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk or the back-to-back meetings scheduled throughout his day. Instead, he held a simple white envelope in his hands, reading the letter inside for what must have been the 10th time in 3 days. "Mr. Harrison," came the voice of his personal assistant Jennifer through the intercom. "Your mother is here to see you." Michael's jaw tightened slightly. Margaret Harrison rarely visited his office without an agenda, and he wasn't in the mood for one of her lectures about his personal life or business decisions. "Send her in," he replied, quickly folding the letter and placing it in his desk drawer. Margaret Harrison entered with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. At 61, she remained an imposing figure. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and an expression that suggested she found the world perpetually disappointing. "Michael, darling," she said, offering her cheek for the obligatory kiss, "I hope you're not too busy for your mother." "Never too busy for you, Mom," Michael replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "What brings you by?" Margaret settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, her posture perfect, her handbag placed precisely on her lap. "I wanted to discuss the Henderson project and also to remind you about the charity gala next weekend. Patricia Henderson will be there, and I think it's time you considered settling down with someone suitable." Michael suppressed a sigh. Patricia Henderson was the daughter of one of his mother's closest friends. Beautiful, well-educated, and from an appropriately wealthy family. She was also incredibly boring and seemed more interested in his bank account than in him as a person. "Mom, I've told you before. I'm not looking to get married right now. I'm focused on the business." "You're 33, Michael. Your father had already given me 2 grandchildren by the time he was your age." Margaret's voice carried the familiar note of disapproval that had followed Michael throughout his adult life. As his mother continued her lecture about responsibility and legacy, Michael's thoughts drifted back to the letter in his drawer. The handwriting was elegant, educated, and something about it seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. The message itself was intriguing and mysterious. "Dear Michael, you don't know me, but we met 7 years ago. I have something important to tell you about a daughter you didn't know existed. Her name is Grace, and she's about to turn 7 years old. I know this sounds impossible, but I have my reasons for waiting until now to contact you. I'm very sick, and time is running short. If you have any curiosity about this claim, please come to 1247 Maple Street, Apartment 2B. I'll be waiting. Someone from your past who needs your help." Michael had spent the last 3 days trying to remember every woman he'd dated 7 years ago. There had been Sarah, the graduate student who worked at the coffee shop near his university. They'd had a brief but intense relationship during his final semester of MBA school. She'd been different from the women his mother usually approved of. Intelligent, passionate about social work, and completely unimpressed by his family's wealth. Then, suddenly, she disappeared from his life without explanation. Could Sarah be the letter writer? The timing would be right, and she was the only woman from that period who had seemed genuinely interested in him rather than his money. But why would she have hidden a pregnancy? Why wait 7 years to contact him? "Michael, are you listening to me?" Margaret's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Sorry, Mom. I was thinking about a business matter." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She had an uncanny ability to sense when her son was hiding something from her. "What kind of business matter has you so distracted?" "Nothing important," Michael lied smoothly. "Just a property acquisition that requires some investigation." After his mother left, promising to send him Patricia Henderson's phone number, Michael couldn't concentrate on anything. He found himself staring at the letter, turning over every possible explanation in his mind. The rational part of him insisted it was probably a scam, someone who had researched his past relationships and was trying to extort money with false paternity claims. But something deeper, more instinctive, told him the letter was genuine. There was an urgency in the words, a desperation that felt real. And if there was even a small chance that he had a daughter out there, by the end of the day Michael had made his decision. He would investigate, but carefully. If this was a scam, he needed to protect himself. If it was real, he needed to understand why he'd been kept in the dark for 7 years. He spent the evening researching the address mentioned in the letter. 1247. Maple Street was in a working-class neighborhood about 30 miles from downtown, not the kind of place where scammers typically operated, but also not somewhere Michael had ever had reason to visit. Through his connections in the real estate industry, Michael discovered that the building was owned by a small property management company. A few discreet inquiries revealed that apartment 2B was rented to someone named Sarah Martinez, and that the building's water system was scheduled for maintenance and repairs due to ongoing issues with low pressure and intermittent outages. Sarah Martinez. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Collins had been her maiden name 7 years ago. She must have married, though Michael found no record of a husband or father listed on any public documents associated with the address. As he sat in his penthouse apartment that night, overlooking the glittering lights of the city, Michael made a plan. He would visit the address, but not as Michael Harrison, CEO. He would go as Mike, a maintenance worker hired to fix the water system. It would give him a chance to observe the situation without revealing his identity, to determine if the letter was genuine or an elaborate hoax. He spent hours researching water system repairs, watching YouTube videos, and even calling a friend who worked in building maintenance to understand the basics of plumbing work. If he was going to pose as a maintenance worker, he needed to be convincing. The next morning, Michael cleared his schedule and drove to a uniform supply store, purchasing work clothes, a tool belt, and basic plumbing tools. He practiced his cover story. He was Mike Henderson, a contractor hired by the building management company to address the water pressure issues. As he drove toward Maple Street, Michael's heart pounded with anticipation and anxiety. He was about to potentially meet his daughter for the first time, though she wouldn't know who he was. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. The neighborhood around Maple Street was a stark contrast to Michael's usual environment. The houses were small and close together, many showing signs of deferred maintenance. Children played in small front yards, while parents sat on front steps, and Michael felt conspicuously out of place despite his work clothes. 1247. Maple Street was a 3-story brick building with a small parking area and what looked like 6 apartments. The building was older but appeared to be well maintained, with clean windows and freshly painted trim around the entrance. Michael parked his BMW around the corner, then walked back carrying his toolbox and wearing his work clothes. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his cover story, and approached the building's main entrance. This was it. In a few minutes, he might meet the daughter he never knew existed. The thought made his hands shake slightly as he reached for the buzzer marked 2B Martinez. Whatever he found behind that door would change his life forever. The buzzer echoed through the small apartment like a gunshot, causing both Sarah and Grace to look up in surprise. Sarah had been dozing fitfully on her mattress, while Grace played quietly with a small collection of worn toys. A few dolls with tangled hair, some picture books with bent pages, and a set of colored pencils that she used to create elaborate drawings on the backs of used envelopes. "Are we expecting someone, Mama?" Grace asked, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah's heart began to race. Could it be? Could Michael have actually received her letter and decided to investigate? She'd almost given up hope after 3 days of waiting, assuming he'd dismissed her message as the desperate ramblings of a stranger. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," Sarah said, struggling to sit up on her mattress. Her condition had worsened over the past week, leaving her weaker and more fatigued than ever. "Could you see who it is?" Grace skipped to the small window that overlooked the building's entrance. Standing on her tiptoes, she peered down at the street below. "There's a man with a toolbox, Mama. He's wearing work clothes." Sarah's heart sank slightly. Not Michael, then. Probably just the maintenance worker the building manager had promised to send to fix their water pressure issues. "That must be the repairman for our water," Sarah told Grace. "Can you buzz him in, sweetheart?" Grace pressed the button that unlocked the main door, then returned to her position by the window to watch the man enter the building. "He's coming upstairs now, Mama." A few moments later, there was a gentle knock on their apartment door. Sarah struggled to her feet, smoothing down her worn sweater and running her fingers through her hair. She hated for strangers to see her in such a weakened state, but there was no choice. "Just a minute," she called out, making her way slowly to the door. When Sarah opened the door, she found herself face to face with a tall man in his early 30s, wearing navy work clothes and carrying a professional-looking toolbox. He had dark hair under a baseball cap and striking grey eyes that seemed somehow familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Mike Henderson," the man said, his voice deep and carefully controlled. "I'm here about the water pressure issues you've been having." "Oh yes, thank you for coming," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "We've been without proper water pressure for almost a week now." As the man, Mike, entered their small apartment, Sarah noticed him taking in their humble surroundings with what appeared to be careful attention. His eyes lingered on the mattress on the floor, the sparse furniture, and the obvious signs of their financial struggles. "Mama, who is this?" Grace asked, appearing beside Sarah with the fearless curiosity that 7-year-olds possessed. Mike's entire body went rigid as he got his first clear look at Grace. The child was beautiful, blonde hair that caught the light, bright blue eyes, and delicate features that were undeniably familiar. But it was more than her appearance that hit him like a physical blow. Something about her expression, the way she tilted her head when she was curious, the shape of her smile, it was like looking at photographs of himself as a child. "This is Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, her voice growing weaker with the effort of standing. "He's here to fix our water." "Hello, Grace," Mike said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. He knelt down to her eye level, struggling to maintain his composure. "I heard it was your birthday yesterday." Grace's face lit up with surprise and delight. "How did you know that?" Mike glanced at Sarah, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of hope and terror. "Your mum mentioned it when she called about the water problem," he lied smoothly. "I'm 7 now," Grace announced proudly. "Mama says 7 is a very grown-up age." "It certainly is," Mike agreed, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "Did you have a nice birthday party?" Grace's expression dimmed slightly, but she maintained her cheerful demeanor with the resilience that children often display in difficult circumstances. "We didn't have a big party, but Mama gave me a magic candle, and I made a very important wish." "A magic candle?" Mike asked, genuinely interested. "Yes, and Mama says that when you make a wish on a magic candle, something wonderful happens." Grace's eyes sparkled with the kind of absolute faith that only children possess. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. There was something about this maintenance worker that seemed different, more educated and refined than she would have expected. The way he spoke to Grace, the gentle attention he gave her responses, reminded Sarah of someone, though she couldn't quite place who. "Grace, why don't you show Mr. Henderson your birthday drawings while I explain the water problem?" Sarah suggested, needing a moment to compose herself. The interaction between this stranger and her daughter was touching but also somehow unsettling. Grace immediately brightened and ran to collect her drawings. "I drew pictures of all the things I wished for," she told Mike as she returned with a small stack of papers. Mike accepted the drawings with the solemnity appropriate to viewing a 7-year-old's artwork. The first drawing showed a house with a big yard and flowers in the garden. The second showed a woman lying in a bed with a smile on her face, clearly Grace's interpretation of her mother being healthy again. The third drawing made Mike's breath catch in his throat. It was a simple but unmistakable drawing of a small family. A woman, a little girl, and a tall man, all holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, in Grace's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family." "This is beautiful, Grace," Mike managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me about this drawing." "That's me and Mama," Grace explained, pointing to the figures. "And that's my daddy." I don't know what he looks like, but I drew him tall because Mama says I got my height from him." Mike looked up at Sarah, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. Their gazes met across the small room, and in that moment, Sarah knew. Somehow, impossibly, the maintenance worker kneeling in her living room, admiring her daughter's drawings, was Michael Harrison. "The water problem is in the kitchen," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, carefully handing Grace's drawings back to her. "These are wonderful, Grace. You're a very talented artist." As Mike followed Sarah to the small kitchen area, he struggled to process what he was experiencing. The child, his daughter, was everything he could have hoped for, and more. She was bright, creative, resilient, and possessed a sweetness that took his breath away. But the conditions she was living in broke his heart. The apartment was clean, but clearly showed the strain of poverty. The refrigerator was nearly empty, the cabinets held only the most basic necessities, and everything showed signs of careful use and reuse. Sarah herself appeared to be seriously ill, her face pale and drawn, her movements careful and labored. "Sarah," Mike said quietly, dropping any pretense of being a maintenance worker, "I got your letter." Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the edge of the small counter for support, staring at the man who had haunted her thoughts for 7 years. "Michael?" she whispered. "Yes," he replied, his voice filled with a mixture of wonder and pain. "She's mine, isn't she?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She's yours, Michael. She's always been yours." From the living room they could hear Grace humming happily as she colored, unaware that her world was about to change forever. The magic candle wish she'd made just 24 hours ago was already coming true, though she didn't know it yet. Michael looked through the doorway at his daughter, and felt his entire world shift on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his priorities, his future, had just been rewritten by a 7-year-old girl with blonde hair and dreams of having a family. "Why?" he asked Sarah, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me?" And as Sarah began to explain about his mother's threats, about the choices she'd made out of love and fear, Michael realized that his journey was just beginning. He had a daughter to get to know, a woman to help heal, and a mother whose interference had cost him 7 precious years, with the child who was already stealing his heart. The magic candle, it seemed, was more powerful than any of them had imagined. The revelation hung in the air between Michael and Sarah like a fragile bridge built from 7 years of secrets and pain. In the living room, Grace continued her innocent humming, completely unaware that her life was about to transform in ways she couldn't imagine. "Your mother," Sarah began, her voice trembling as she gripped the kitchen counter for support, "came to see me when I was 3 months pregnant. I hadn't even started showing yet, but somehow she knew." Michael's face hardened. Throughout his life, his mother had orchestrated events to align with her vision of what was best for the family, but this level of interference felt like betrayal on an unimaginable scale. "She said I was nothing but a gold digger trying to trap you with a convenient pregnancy," Sarah continued, each word clearly painful to speak. "She told me that if I ever contacted you about the baby, she would use her influence to make sure I never graduated, never found decent work, never had any kind of future." "She threatened you," Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. "She threatened my pregnant girlfriend and kept me from knowing about my own child." Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I was so scared, Michael. I was just 28, trying to finish my master's degree in social work, working part-time at that coffee shop to pay rent. I had no family, no money, no resources to fight someone like Margaret Harrison. She made it clear that you would never believe me over her, and that even if you did, the scandal would damage your career and your family's reputation." Grace's voice drifted in from the living room as she sang a made-up song about rainbows and birthday wishes, her pure joy a stark contrast to the heavy conversation in the kitchen. "So you disappeared," Michael said, understanding beginning to dawn. "You just vanished from my life without explanation." "I thought I was protecting you," Sarah whispered, "and protecting Grace. I moved here, changed my name back to Martinez, had her alone. I worked 2 jobs while she was little, cleaning offices at night after my day job at a local clinic. I managed to keep us afloat until—" She gestured weakly at herself. "Until you got sick," Michael finished. "Lupus?" Sarah said simply. "It's been getting progressively worse over the past 2 years. The medications are expensive and I can barely work anymore. Some days I can't even get out of bed. Grace has learned to make her own breakfast, to be so independent it breaks my heart. That's why I finally wrote to you. Not for me, but for Grace. She deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know about her." Michael ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. 7 years of his daughter's life, lost forever. 7 years of birthdays, first steps, first words, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and childhood wonder that he would never get back. The rage he felt toward his mother was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. "Tell me about her," he said suddenly. "Tell me about Grace. What was she like as a baby? When did she first walk? What's her favorite color? What makes her laugh?" His voice cracked with the desperate need to know everything he'd missed. Sarah's expression softened, and despite her exhaustion, a mother's pride shone through. "She was the most beautiful baby, Michael. She had these incredible blue eyes from the moment she was born. Your eyes. She was curious about everything, always reaching for things, always babbling as if she had so much to tell the world." "When did she start walking?" 11 months. Sarah smiled through her tears. "And once she started, she never stopped. She would toddle around our tiny apartment, pointing at everything and saying, 'What's that? What's that?' She was speaking in full sentences by 18 months. The pediatrician said she was remarkably advanced." Michael felt his chest tighten with a mixture of pride and profound loss. "What else?" "She's always been an artist," Sarah continued. "Even before she could hold a crayon properly, she was scribbling pictures and telling elaborate stories about what she'd drawn. She sees magic in everything. Clouds that look like animals, flowers that she's convinced are fairy houses, stones that she collects because they're special. And her favorite color? Purple." Sarah laughed softly, "but not just any purple. Princess purple, she calls it. She has very specific opinions about which shades are acceptable, and she's obsessed with butterflies. She knows all their names, can tell you which ones migrate and which ones don't." Michael absorbed every detail, filing away these precious insights into his daughter's personality. "Does she ask about me?" Sarah's smile faded slightly. "All the time, especially at night when I tuck her in. She wants to know if you're tall, if you're smart, if you would like her drawings. I always tell her that any father would be lucky to have such an amazing daughter, but that seems to make her more curious, not less." "I need to call my attorney," Michael said finally, "and my doctor. We're going to get you the best medical care available, and we're going to make sure Grace has everything she needs." "Michael, I don't want your charity," Sarah said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I just wanted Grace to know you exist." "This isn't charity," Michael replied firmly. "This is me taking care of my family, something I should have been doing for the past 7 years. Before Sarah could respond, Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway looking concerned. Her small face was scrunched with worry, and she was carrying one of her drawings. "Mama, Mr. Henderson," Grace said softly, "why are you both crying? Are you sad about something?" Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. "How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her entire world is about to change? How do you tell a child that the father she's dreamed about is standing right in front of her? Michael knelt down to Grace's eye level, his heart pounding. Grace, I need to tell you something very important. Can you come sit with me for a minute? Grace nodded solemnly and took his offered hand, allowing him to lead her to the small couch in the living room. Sarah followed slowly, settling beside them on the worn cushions. Grace still clutched her drawing. Michael could see it was another family picture, this one showing 3 stick figures standing in front of a house with a large sun overhead. Grace, Michael began, struggling to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes mean that families don't get to be together when they should be. Like when parents get divorced, Grace asked, with the matter-of-fact wisdom of a child who had learned about the world through observation and questions. Something like that, Michael agreed. Grace, I'm not really a repairman. I came here today because your mama sent me a letter telling me about you. Grace's brow furrowed in confusion. Why would mama send you a letter about me? Michael took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything. Because, sweetheart, I'm your daddy. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Grace stared at Michael with wide blue eyes, processing this information with the seriousness of someone much older than 7. You're my daddy? She whispered finally. Yes, Grace. I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry that I didn't know about you before now. I would have been here from the very beginning if I had known. Grace looked back and forth between Michael and her mother, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that adults had made unnecessarily complicated. But why didn't you know about me? She asked with the logical directness of childhood. Don't daddies usually know when they have little girls? Michael felt his heart break at the innocent question. Usually they do, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they should be simple. The important thing is that I know about you now, and I want to be your daddy more than anything in the world. Is that why you knew it was my birthday? She asked. Michael smiled through his tears. I wanted to know everything about you the moment I found out you existed. Grace was quiet for a long moment, studying Michael's face with the intense concentration that children bring to important decisions. Then, suddenly, she launched herself into his arms with the complete trust that only children possess. I wished for you, she whispered against his neck. On my magic candle, I wished for my daddy to come home. Michael held his daughter for the first time, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling her small arms wrapped around his neck, and understanding for the first time in his life what unconditional love really meant. The child in his arms was part of him, created from his DNA and his heart, and the connection was immediate and overwhelming. Your wish came true, sweetheart, he whispered back. Daddy's home now. Sarah watched this reunion through tears of relief and joy, knowing that despite all the pain and struggle of the past 7 years, she had made the right choice in reaching out to Michael. Grace was going to have the father she deserved, and Michael was going to experience the joy of being a parent. Grace, Michael said gently, pulling back to look at his daughter's face. I have a lot to learn about being your daddy, but I promise you that I'm never going away again. And we're going to make sure your mama gets the best doctors and medicine so she can get better. Can we have a real birthday party? Grace asked with sudden excitement, her resilience and ability to focus on joy rather than dwelling on confusion amazing both adults. With a cake and balloons and maybe some friends. Michael laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the small apartment. We can have the biggest, most amazing birthday party you've ever seen. We have 7 birthdays to make up for. 7 parties. Grace's eyes grew wide with wonder. Well, maybe not 7 parties all at once, Michael chuckled. But we're going to celebrate every birthday you've had that I missed, and every birthday you'll have from now on. Grace clapped her hands together, then suddenly grew serious again. "Daddy, are you rich?" The question caught Michael off guard, and he glanced at Sarah, who looked equally surprised. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because Mama always says we can't afford things, and she gets worried about money. Emma at school, her daddy is rich, and she gets to go to Disney World and has lots of toys. If you're rich, does that mean Mama won't have to worry anymore?" The innocence and wisdom of the question brought fresh tears to both adults' eyes. Grace had been aware of their financial struggles, had learned to temper her desires to spare her mother additional stress, and now she was hoping that her father's presence might mean security for the family she loved. "Yes, Grace," Michael said softly. "I am rich, and that means Mama won't have to worry about money anymore. But more importantly, it means we can get her the best doctors to help her feel better." "And I can get new crayons?" Grace asked hopefully. "Mine are getting pretty small." "You can have all the crayons you want," Michael promised, "and colored pencils and markers and paint and paper and anything else you need for your beautiful artwork." As Grace chatted excitedly about all the things she wanted to draw for her daddy, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his mother. "Don't forget about dinner tonight. Patricia will be there." Michael's jaw tightened as he remembered his mother's role in keeping him from this moment for 7 years. There would be a reckoning, but not today. Today was about Grace, about Sarah, about beginning to build the family that should have existed all along. "Grace," he said, "how would you like to see where Daddy works? I have a big office with windows that look out over the whole city." "Really?" Grace's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Can I see it today?" "If Mama feels up to it, we could go there right now," Michael said, looking at Sarah questioningly. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a smile without reservation or worry behind it. "I think that sounds wonderful." As they prepared to leave the small apartment, Grace ran to her room to gather some of her drawings to show her father's office. Michael took the opportunity to speak privately with Sarah. "I meant what I said about the medical care," he said quietly. "I'm going to call my doctor today and arrange for you to see the best specialists in the city. Money is no object when it comes to your health." "Michael," Sarah began, but he gently interrupted her. "Sarah, I know you're independent, and I know you don't want to feel like you're taking advantage, but this isn't about charity or pity. This is about family. Grace needs her mother healthy, and I—" He paused, struggling with emotions he hadn't expected. "I need you healthy too. I can't lose either of you now that I've found you." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to explore fully. But Sarah nodded, understanding that accepting help was not the same as giving up her independence. "And Sarah," Michael continued, "we need to talk about living arrangements. This apartment is too small for a growing child, and with your health condition, you need a better environment. I'd like you and Grace to move in with me, at least temporarily, until we figure out what works best for our family." "Your family," Sarah repeated softly. "It's strange to hear that. For 7 years it's just been Grace and me against the world." "Not anymore," Michael said firmly. "You're not alone anymore. Neither of you are." That evening, after they'd visited Michael's office, where Grace had been suitably impressed by the city view and had immediately begun planning which corner would be best for an art easel, and after they'd shared dinner at a family restaurant where Grace had peppered Michael with hundreds of questions about his childhood, his favorite foods, and whether he liked butterflies as much as she did, Michael made 2 phone calls. The first was to his attorney, James Morrison, arranging for immediate financial support for Sarah and Grace, as well as legal steps to establish his paternity and secure his rights as Grace's father. "I want everything expedited," Michael told James. I want Grace's medical insurance transferred to my policy immediately. I want a trust fund established for her education. And I want legal documentation that makes my financial responsibility for both of them absolutely clear. Michael, James said carefully, I have to ask, are you certain about paternity? Certain. Have you considered requesting a DNA test? Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking about Grace's eyes, her expressions, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, all so familiar, so clearly his. But more than that, he thought about the connection he'd felt from the moment he'd seen her, the certainty that had settled in his bones. Schedule the test if you think it's legally necessary, Michael said finally. But James, I know she's mine. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The second call was to his mother. Margaret Harrison, came his mother's crisp voice. Mother, Michael said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. We need to talk. Tonight. Of course, darling. Patricia's looking forward to... Cancel dinner, Michael interrupted. Cancel Patricia. Cancel everything. You and I are going to have a conversation about a 7-year-old girl named Grace Martinez and about the threats you made to her mother 7 years ago. The silence on the other end of the line told Michael everything he needed to know. His mother remembered exactly what she had done, and she knew that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble around her. Michael, she began, her voice smaller than usual, I think there's been some misunderstanding. 7 years, Mother, Michael cut her off. 7 years of my daughter's life that you stole from me. 7 years of her believing her father didn't want her. 7 years of Sarah struggling alone, getting sicker and poorer, because you decided you knew what was best for everyone. You don't understand, Margaret began. I understand perfectly, Michael said. I understand that you threatened a pregnant woman. I understand that you kept me from my own child. I understand that your prejudices and your need to control my life have cost me the most important relationship I could ever have. Margaret's voice grew smaller, more defensive. She was just a waitress, Michael. She wasn't suitable for our family. She had no money, no connections, no breeding. I was protecting you from making a terrible mistake that would have ruined your future. The only terrible mistake, Michael replied, was trusting you to have my best interests at heart. Grace is the most remarkable child I've ever met, and Sarah is an incredible woman who raised our daughter alone while battling a serious illness, all because you couldn't see past your own snobbery and need for control. Michael, please. I'll be at your house in an hour, Michael said. We're going to discuss how you're going to make this right, starting with a sincere apology to Sarah and Grace. And Mother, if you ever interfere in my family's life again, you'll lose access to all of us permanently. Das. As Michael hung up the phone, he looked back toward the guest room where Grace was staying for the night, probably still too excited about meeting her father to fall asleep easily. He had a lot of work to do to make up for lost time, but he had never been more motivated to succeed at anything in his life. Grace Martinez, soon to be Grace Harrison, was worth fighting for, worth changing his entire world for, worth everything he could give her and more. The healing was about to begin, but first there would be a reckoning with the woman whose fears and prejudices had nearly destroyed the most important relationship of his life. 3 weeks later, the transformation in the Martinez-Harrison household was nothing short of miraculous. Michael had kept his promise in every possible way, moving with the efficiency and determination that had made him successful in business, but now directed toward the most important project of his life, his family. Sarah's treatment had begun immediately at Northwestern Memorial Hospital under the care of Dr. Rebecca Chen, one of the country's leading lupus specialists. The comprehensive treatment plan included not only the latest medications, but also nutritional support, physical therapy, and counseling to help Sarah process the emotional toll of her years of struggle. The inflammation markers are improving significantly, Dr. Chen explained during Sarah's 3-week follow-up appointment. The new immunosuppressive therapy seems to be working well, and your energy levels should continue to increase over the next few months. The combination of proper nutrition, stress reduction, and the new treatment protocol is giving us very encouraging results. Michael sat beside Sarah in the comfortable consultation room, holding her hand as they received the news they'd all been hoping for. Grace was at school, her new school, where Michael had enrolled her in Lincoln Elementary, a warm, nurturing environment with small class sizes, excellent programs for gifted children, and an art teacher who had immediately recognized Grace's exceptional talent. "How long before I can go back to work?" Sarah asked. The question had been weighing on her mind, despite Michael's assurances that money would never be a concern again. Work had always been important to her identity, and the forced inactivity of her illness had been almost as difficult as the physical symptoms. "I'd like to see how you respond over the next 3 months," Dr. Chen replied. "But with proper management, many lupus patients live full, active lives. There's no reason you can't return to social work when you're ready. In fact, the emotional satisfaction of meaningful work often contributes positively to overall health outcomes." Days after the appointment, Michael and Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and watching the bustle of medical professionals and visitors around them. Their relationship had been complicated to navigate. They weren't strangers, but they also weren't the same people who had fallen in love 7 years ago. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Sarah admitted quietly, stirring her coffee absently. "This all feels too good to be true. Grace is thriving at her new school. I'm getting better for the first time in years, and you've been—" She paused, searching for words. "I've been what?" Michael asked gently. "Perfect," Sarah said with a small laugh. "Patient with Grace when she has nightmares about you disappearing. Understanding when I have bad days and can barely get out of bed. You've given us everything we need without making us feel like charity cases. You've become the father Grace always dreamed of having, and you've done it so naturally, it's like you've been there all along." Michael reached across the table to take her hand. "Sarah, this is what should have happened 7 years ago. This is what would have happened if my mother hadn't interfered. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm doing what any father and what any man who cares about you would do." The pause in his words didn't go unnoticed by either of them. Their feelings for each other were complicated by time, circumstances, and the shared love of their daughter, but something was definitely growing between them again. "Grace asked me yesterday if we were going to be a family like in her drawings," Sarah said with a small smile. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that families come in all different shapes, and that the most important thing is that everyone loves and takes care of each other." Michael nodded, understanding the wisdom in her response. "She's remarkable, Sarah. I know I've only known her for 3 weeks, but she's the most amazing child I've ever met. The way she's adapted to all these changes, the way she's embraced having me in her life without any resentment about my absence. It speaks to the incredible job you've done raising her." "She gets that from both of us," Sarah replied, with a warmth that made Michael's heart skip. "She has your intelligence and determination, but also your kindness. And she definitely has your stubborn streak." They laughed together, and for a moment it felt like the easy companionship they'd shared years ago. The attraction was still there, but now it was complicated by parenthood, by years of separation, by the knowledge of how much they'd both changed. "How are things with your mother?" Sarah asked carefully. The confrontation between Michael and Margaret Harrison had been legendary, according to Michael's account, but Sarah hadn't pressed for details. Michael's expression grew more serious. "Difficult. She's agreed to family therapy, which is a condition I set for her having any relationship with Grace. But she's struggling to understand why her actions were wrong. She keeps saying she was protecting me, protecting the family reputation. And what do you say to that? I tell her that she didn't protect anything. She destroyed it. She cost me 7 years with my daughter, 7 years of watching Grace grow up, 7 years of being there for you when you needed support. Michael's voice grew harder. She made decisions about my life and Grace's life without consulting either of us, and the consequences have been devastating. Sarah squeezed his hand. Will she come around? She'll have to, if she wants to be part of Grace's life. Grace deserves to know her grandmother, but only if Margaret can learn to treat our family with respect and love, not judgment and interference. That evening, Michael attended Grace's school play, her first performance since starting at Lincoln Elementary. She played a sunflower in the class production of The Garden of Friendship, and Michael's chest swelled with pride as he watched his daughter deliver her lines with confidence and joy. "That's my daddy," he heard Grace whisper loudly to the little girl, playing a rose beside her, and Michael felt his heart might burst from happiness. After the play, they celebrated at Grace's new favorite restaurant, Pancake Paradise, a family diner that served breakfast all day and had crayons on every table. Grace colored enthusiastically while she told Michael about her new friends, her favorite teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and her plans for the upcoming science fair. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I should enter my butterfly project," Grace explained, carefully coloring a butterfly on her placemat. "I've been studying monarch migration patterns, and I have all these charts showing their routes from Canada to Mexico." "That sounds fascinating," Michael said, genuinely impressed. "How did you become so interested in butterflies?" Grace looked up from her coloring, her expression suddenly serious. "When I was little, and Mama was having really bad days with her sickness, I used to sit by the window and watch for butterflies in Mrs. Henderson's garden next door. Mama told me that butterflies were symbols of transformation, that they start as one thing and become something completely different and beautiful." Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And what did you think about that?" "I thought maybe Mama would transform too and get better. And maybe our life would transform and become different and beautiful." Grace returned to her coloring, adding purple touches to the butterfly's wings. "And it did. You came, and Mama's getting better, and everything's different now. Better different." Sarah, who'd been quietly listening to this exchange, reached across the table to stroke Grace's hair. "You're very wise, sweetheart. Daddy, Emma's parents are divorced, but she sees her daddy every weekend and on holidays. Is that what we're going to do?" Grace asked, with the directness that never failed to catch Michael off guard. Michael looked at Sarah, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. They'd been taking things day by day, focused on Grace's adjustment and Sarah's health, but they hadn't really discussed what their long-term arrangement would look like. "Well, sweetheart," Michael said carefully, "Mama and Daddy are going to figure out what works best for our family. The most important thing is that you get to spend lots of time with both of us." "Could we all live in the same house?" Grace asked hopefully. "Like a real family?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibility and complexity. Michael found himself holding his breath, waiting for Sarah's response. "Maybe someday, Grace," Sarah said gently. "But for now, we're all learning how to be a family together, and that takes time." Grace seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her coloring, but Michael could see the wheels turning in her young mind. She was smart enough to understand that adult relationships were complicated, but innocent enough to believe that love could solve anything. Later that evening, after they'd tucked Grace into her new bed in the beautiful bedroom Michael had created for her in his penthouse, complete with a princess canopy, a desk for drawing, and walls painted in her beloved princess purple, Michael and Sarah sat on his terrace overlooking the city lights. "She wants us to be together," Sarah said quietly, wrapping Michael's jacket around her shoulders against the cool November air. "Is that what you want?" Michael asked, his voice careful and hopeful. Sarah was quiet for a long time, considering her words. 7 years ago, I thought we could have had something wonderful together. We were so compatible, so easy with each other. But then your mother made it clear that I wasn't welcome in your world, and I convinced myself that maybe she was right. Maybe we were too different, from two different backgrounds. And now? Now I see how you are with Grace, how you've stepped up without hesitation, how you've taken care of both of us without making us feel like charity cases. I see the man I fell in love with, but stronger, more mature. She paused, looking out at the glittering skyline. But I also know that we can't just pick up where we left off. We're different people now, and we have Grace to consider. Michael nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution. I don't want to rush anything, Sarah, but I also don't want to waste any more time. I lost 7 years with you and Grace because I let someone else make decisions about my life. I won't make that mistake again. What about your social circle, your business associates? What will they think about you suddenly having a 7-year-old daughter and a girlfriend who used to be a waitress? Michael turned to face her fully. Sarah, if anyone in my social circle has a problem with my family, then they're not people I want in my life. Grace is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and you're the woman who gave her to me and raised her to be incredible. Anyone who can't see how lucky I am to have both of you isn't worth my time. And your mother? Sarah asked. She's made it clear that she still doesn't approve of me. Michael's expression hardened slightly. The confrontation with his mother 3 weeks ago had been one of the most difficult conversations of his life, but it had also been necessary. Margaret Harrison had been forced to confront the consequences of her interference, though she still struggled to understand why her actions had been wrong. My mother is going to have to accept that Grace and you are part of my life now, Michael said firmly. She can choose to be a loving grandmother and treat you with respect, or she can choose to have limited contact with all of us. But she will never again have the power to keep our family apart. Udi. As they sat together in comfortable silence, both Sarah and Michael felt the weight of possibility around them. They were building something new, not trying to recreate the past, but creating a future that honored their shared love for Grace while allowing space for whatever might grow between them. Can I tell you something? Sarah said softly. Anything. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was angry about the situation, even when I convinced myself that we were too different, even when I was struggling alone with a sick baby and no money for medicine, I never stopped loving you. Michael's breath caught. Sarah, I know it's complicated, she continued. I know we have a lot to figure out, but I want you to know that what we had was real, and what we might have again could be real too. Michael reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. I never stopped loving you either. I looked for you, you know, after you disappeared. I went back to the coffee shop, asked around campus, tried to find out where you'd gone. When I couldn't find you, I told myself maybe it was for the best. Maybe we'd burned too bright to last. But I was wrong. They leaned closer together, and for a moment it seemed like they might kiss, but then Sarah pulled back slightly. I want to take this slowly, she said, for Grace's sake and for ours. We have all the time in the world now. Michael smiled, understanding and respecting her caution. All the time in the world, he agreed. Inside the penthouse, Grace slept peacefully in her new bedroom, surrounded by the security and love she'd always deserved. Her magical birthday wish had brought her father into her life, but the real magic was in the daily moments they were building together. Bedtime stories, homework help, Saturday morning pancakes, and the growing certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The healing was happening faster than any of them had dared to hope, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. But there was still one more surprise waiting for them, one that would complete their transformation from a broken family to something beautiful and whole. 2 weeks later, as Sarah's health continued to improve and Grace settled even more confidently into her new life, Michael received a phone call that would change everything once again. "Mr. Harrison," came the voice of his attorney, James Morrison. "I have the results of the paternity test you requested." Michael's heart stopped, even though he'd never doubted the results. "And? Congratulations," James said with warmth in his voice. "Grace is definitely your daughter. 99.9% probability of paternity. The paperwork for legal recognition is ready for your signature." After hanging up, Michael sat in his office for several minutes, staring out at the Chicago skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He was officially, legally, unquestionably Grace's father. The little girl with purple butterfly dreams and an artist's soul was his daughter in every possible way. That evening he shared the news with Sarah and Grace over dinner. "Does this mean I can officially be Grace Harrison now?" Grace asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "If that's what you want," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want that more than anything," Grace replied solemnly, "except maybe a little brother or sister someday." Sarah choked on her water, and Michael burst into laughter at his daughter's matter-of-fact announcement. "Well," he said, winking at Sarah, "let's see what the future holds." The magic was still working, and the best was yet to come. 6 months after Michael first walked into that small apartment on Maple Street, the Harrison family gathered in the sunlit living room of their new home. A beautiful house in Evanston with a large yard, a swing set, and a garden where Grace had planted sunflowers and butterfly-attracting flowers just like the one she'd played in her school performance. It was Grace's 8th birthday, and this celebration bore no resemblance to the lonely candle in a cramped apartment. The dining room table groaned under the weight of a 3-layer chocolate cake, decorated with buttercream butterflies in every shade of purple Grace could imagine, and 8 bright candles that seemed to dance with joy. Colorful balloons filled the corners of the room, and carefully wrapped presents created a small mountain beside Grace's chair. But the most important gift wasn't wrapped in paper and ribbons. It was the family surrounding the birthday girl. A family that had fought its way back together against impossible odds. "Before we light the candles," Michael said, standing behind Grace's chair with his hands on her shoulders, "I have something special to share with everyone." Sarah looked up from her position beside Grace, her face glowing with health and happiness. The lupus treatment had been remarkably successful, and she'd been able to return to part-time work at a non-profit organization called Second Chances, which helped families in crisis, work that felt deeply meaningful given her own experiences. "What is it, Daddy?" Grace asked, practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. She wore a new purple dress that Michael had let her pick out herself, and her blonde hair was adorned with butterfly clips that caught the afternoon light. Around the table sat their chosen family, Dr. Chen, who had become not just Sarah's physician, but a trusted friend, Mrs. Rodriguez, Grace's teacher, who had become like a surrogate grandmother, James Morrison, Michael's attorney, who had been instrumental in making their legal family status official, and even Margaret Harrison, who sat quietly in the corner looking somewhat uncomfortable but genuinely trying to be supportive. The relationship between Michael's mother and his new family remained complicated, but progress was being made. Margaret had been required to attend family therapy sessions as a condition of maintaining contact with Grace, and slowly she was beginning to understand the damage her prejudices and need for control had caused. "I owe you both an apology," Margaret had said to Sarah and Grace during one particularly difficult session 2 months earlier. I let my fears about social status and my need to control my son's life blind me to the kind of person you really are, Sarah. And Grace, I cost your daddy 7 years of watching you grow up, and I cost you 7 years of having your father in your life. That's something I'll have to live with forever. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Grace deserved to know her grandmother, and Margaret deserved the chance to make amends, even if it would take time. In recent weeks, Margaret had started bringing Grace small gifts, art supplies, books about butterflies, and even a beautiful wooden easel for her bedroom. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace, do you remember when you drew that picture of our family? The one with you and Mama and me all holding hands? Grace nodded enthusiastically. The drawing now hung framed in Michael's office, where clients and colleagues could see how proud he was of his daughter. Well, Michael continued, dropping to one knee beside Sarah's chair, I was wondering if you'd like to help me ask Mama a very important question. Sarah's breath caught as Michael opened the ring box, revealing a stunning but elegant diamond ring that somehow managed to be both breathtaking and perfectly suited to her personality. The center stone was surrounded by smaller diamonds, arranged to look like flower petals, and Grace gasped with delight. "It looks like a butterfly!" Grace exclaimed, leaning closer to examine the ring. "Sarah Martinez," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "7 years ago we were kept apart by fear and manipulation. But Grace's courage in writing that letter brought us back together, and every day since then has shown me that you are the love of my life, the mother I want for my children, and the partner I want for everything that comes next." Around the table, their friends watched with tears in their eyes as the scene unfolded. "You're strong, compassionate, brilliant, and the most amazing mother I've ever seen," Michael continued. "You raised our daughter alone through impossible circumstances, and you've created a person so wonderful that she literally wished her family back together. Sarah, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost and building the future we should have had all along." Grace watched with wide eyes, understanding that she was witnessing something momentous. She slipped out of her chair and went to stand beside her parents, putting one small hand on each of their shoulders. "Will you marry me?" Michael asked. "Will you let me make this family official in every possible way?" Sarah looked around the table at all the people who had become part of their extended family, then down at Grace, whose face was glowing with excitement and hope. Finally, she looked back at Michael, the man who had appeared in their lives like magic and transformed everything. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Grace erupted in cheers as Michael slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, and the small gathering of friends and chosen family applauded enthusiastically. Even Margaret Harrison managed a genuine smile, and Dr. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. "Can I be the flower girl at your wedding?" Grace asked eagerly, hugging both her parents at once. "You can be anything you want to be," Sarah laughed, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I want to be the flower girl, and I want to help plan everything, and I want my dress to be purple, and can we have butterflies at the wedding?" Grace's words tumbled out in an excited rush. "We can have all the butterflies you want," Michael promised, kissing the top of her head. As the birthday party continued around them, with cake and presents and laughter filling the house that had become their sanctuary, Michael and Sarah found quiet moments throughout the afternoon to simply look at each other and marvel at how far they'd come. Later, after the guests had gone home and Grace had been tucked into bed with her new birthday presents, including a professional set of art supplies from Michael and a beautiful butterfly identification book from Margaret, Michael and Sarah sat on the back porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't written that letter?" Sarah asked, leaning against Michael's chest as they sat together on the porch swing he'd installed just for moments like this. "Every day," Michael replied, wrapping his arms around her, "but I try not to dwell on the time we lost. I'd rather focus on all the time we have ahead of us." "Grace wants a little brother or sister," Sarah said with a smile in her voice. "Does she now?" Michael laughed. "And what does her mother want?" "Her mother wants whatever will make our family happy and complete." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of wind chimes and feeling the solid foundation of the life they'd built together. It hadn't been easy. There had been adjustments, difficult conversations, and moments of doubt. Grace had needed time to adjust to having a father after years of it being just her and her mother. Sarah had struggled with accepting help after years of fierce independence. Michael had had to learn how to be a parent while also navigating the complex dynamics of rekindling a relationship with Sarah, while his mother slowly learned to accept their unconventional family. But they'd faced everything together, with Grace's innocent wisdom often lighting the way forward. "I have something else to tell you," Michael said, his voice suddenly more serious. Sarah turned to look at him. "What?" "I've been talking to my lawyer about something. I want to start a foundation, the Grace Foundation. Something to help single mothers who are facing the kinds of challenges you faced. Medical care, legal assistance, childcare, job training, whatever they need to keep their families together and thriving." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Michael, that's perfect. We could help other families stay together when circumstances try to tear them apart. I want you to run it," Michael continued, "when you're ready, when your health is stable. I can't think of anyone better qualified to understand what these families need." "You mean it? I've never been more serious about anything." "Well, except maybe asking you to marry me." As they talked about their plans, their dreams, and their hopes for the future, they both felt the deep satisfaction of a life that had found its proper course. Grace's magical birthday wish 2 years ago had set everything in motion, but it was their commitment to each other and to their daughter that had made the magic real. Inside the house, Grace slept peacefully in her bedroom, surrounded by the security of a family that would never be separated again. Her drawings now showed a complete family with rings on the appropriate fingers, and her latest artwork featured a house full of love, laughter, and the promise of little brothers or sisters to come. But perhaps the most beautiful drawing was the one she'd completed that very morning, a picture of 3 butterflies flying together against a rainbow sky, with the words, "My family's transformation," written carefully at the bottom in her improving handwriting. 3 months later, on a beautiful spring day, when the garden was in full bloom and butterflies danced among the flowers that Grace had helped plant, Michael and Sarah were married in their backyard, surrounded by friends, family, and the people who had become part of their journey. Grace walked down the makeshift aisle in a purple dress, scattering flower petals and beaming with joy. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Grace raised her hand and said, "I object," causing everyone to gasp until she continued with a giggle, "I object to waiting any longer for them to be married." The laughter that followed was the kind that comes from pure joy. And when Michael and Sarah kissed as husband and wife, Grace cheered loudest of all. That evening, as they danced under strings of lights in their garden, Sarah whispered to her new husband, "Do you think our story is finished now?" Michael looked over at Grace, who was dancing with her grandmother Margaret, the two of them finally building a real relationship based on love rather than control, and smiled. "I think," he said, "our story is just beginning." 6 months after the wedding, Sarah had wonderful news to share. The Grace Foundation was thriving, having already helped dozens of families, and she was pregnant with their second child. "A little brother or sister?" Grace asked, her eyes wide with wonder when they told her. "We won't know for a few more months," Sarah explained. "I hope it's twins," Grace announced matter-of-factly. "One of each. That way our family will be even more magical." Michael and Sarah exchanged amused glances. With Grace's track record for wishes coming true, they weren't about to bet against her. As they sat together in their living room, watching Grace draw pictures of the expanded family she was envisioning, they realized that the little girl, who had once celebrated her birthday alone with a single candle, had indeed possessed the most powerful magic of all, the magic of hope, love, and the unshakable belief that families belong together. The magic candle had done its work, but the real magic, the magic of love, forgiveness, second chances, and the courage to reach out when everything seems impossible, would last forever. And somewhere in the world, another little girl might be making a birthday wish on a single candle, hoping for her own miracle. And perhaps, with enough courage and love, her wish would come true too. The Harrison family was complete, healed, and ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The magic, it turned out, had been inside them all along. It just took a brave little girl, a desperate mother's letter, and a single birthday candle to set it free.